As Egypt goes through the labor pains of delivering what we hope will be a strong and healthy democratic baby, there were four revolutionary thoughts which came out yesterday morning. One of them was that the time has come for us to reveal our cards. And I thought that was extremely courageous, to reach a point to say that for the larger good, we need to now stop negotiating too hard and open up our cards to come to a decision and a resolution. The second was that the revolution will succeed because the young generation has had the courage to stand up for change. For democracy to be real, it needs to be rooted in people. And fourth, we were reminded of the signs of our times that the social media, the social networking media, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, has had a tremendous role to play in what's happening in the Middle East. And this is really the sign of times that we are now tweeting our way to democracy. But there are labor pains. And when I actually picked up the various challenges articulated by various speakers yesterday, I was a little overawed. More than 12,000 civilians have actually faced military trial. Activists are being targeted. Many of them have lost their eyesight. The constitution of the country is yet to be drafted, which puts the threat of the military still being a strong player. Corruption, like someone said yesterday, has become a way of life. There is interference and tacit support, not for the protesters and the revolution, but to delay the revolution and probably not allow it to happen by some of the neighboring countries in the region, whether it be Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait. And someone made a very interesting point yesterday. Did you notice that the second largest recipient of US aid outside of Israel is Egypt, and almost 80% of that is probably spent in arms and ammunition. Managing the expectation of the people seems to be another challenge, and I connect this with what we heard from the Vice President of South Sudan. And this seems to be a phenomenon of all new emerging democracies. It's not only the internal challenge of the structure and the institutions, but also managing the expectation of the people. And here I am challenged with a question that, is the expectation of the citizens a little too unreal in terms of the time frame? Are the people expecting too much in too short a time frame? Something for us to think about. We spoke about the misunderstandings between the Muslims and the Christians in the country, and the economy is not very strong. They're dependent on tourism. I was told over lunch yesterday that tourism has fallen by almost 90%. And if the economy is not going to be strong, they're worried how are they going to build a strong political foundation. So these are the labor pains they're facing while delivering this healthy and strong democratic baby. And there were some learnings. I thought one of the profound statements was that democracy is threatened if we do not see the fruits of democracy. And I think the Egyptian team was very lucky when there was an intervention by our former Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Krishnamurthy, who made two very valid points. He said, one, democracy does not guarantee happiness. There is nothing like a perfect democracy. And second, he recommended and advised, move quick, draft a constitution, even if it's not perfect, reform it later on. It's better to have a constitution fast than have nothing at all. I thought the sharing of the Gandhi-Nehru conversation on arrogance was very, very contextual, where Gandhi advises Nehru that if you fight their arrogance of oppression with your arrogance of revolution, their arrogance will win. But if you fight their arrogance with humility, humility will win. Win we did, and not only win, but we parted as friends. And I think that's a learning for some of the countries who are going through the challenge right now. And it was tremendous to hear of the IFC work happening in Egypt, and with community development, housing, and as one of the panelists put it, that we are really working towards strengthening the fabric of the nation. And it was very, very touching when we heard the story of how the Muslims had actually formed a human chain around the church to save the church. And I thought that was very, very touching. Personally, I'm just waiting for the day when Egypt is a strong and healthy democracy, and I get an email from my friends over there saying, come to Tahrir Square, come to Tahrir Square. March 2011 is when the breeze of the Arab Spring came to Syria, which has been under dictatorship for 40 years, is known as the Kingdom of Fear. And just so that you get a better understanding, now listen to this. Primary school children in the age of 8 to 13 were arrested because they wrote graffiti on their school wall. Primary school children have been arrested. Now that's the kind of challenge they're facing in Syria, which has actually sparked up a protest, but sadly has led to something called a death cycle. The protests lead to killings, which lead to a funeral, which leads to more protests, which leads to killings, and this is what's going on. And we are reminded of something which we should never forget, that all the deaths, they're not just a statistic. We are reminded, they're not just a statistic, that each one of the persons who's died has left behind a family that is affected and which grieves. And here is something which we are all challenged with. The people of Syria had insisted that this be a non-violent, peaceful movement, but as we heard yesterday, it is not working. The non-violent, peaceful movement as of yet is not working, and I'm only reminded of what Winston Churchill had said after the war. He was invited to one of the universities to give a talk, and everyone was expecting this huge talk by Winston Churchill, and he goes up and this is what he says. He says, never, never, never give up. The breakout sessions generated a lot of discussion, and I could actually see a lot of foreign delegates cornering some of our senior former bureaucrats and government officers and people who are from civil society, if I may be permitted to use that term for lack of a better one at the moment, to understand better how they can strengthen and build out their democratic institution. And this dialogue is not enriched just by what happens inside during the sessions. It's also what happens outside. I thought the Freedom Square yesterday was just fabulous. I mean, all of us got an opportunity to say something from the heart, and I thought that was just tremendous. And over lunch, I had this tremendous experience. I was sitting for lunch with Parthiban, who has a very interesting story on banking, and there was a chair over there which was empty, and he said, Edward Peters is coming to have lunch with me. So I thought Edward is probably meeting with Parthiban to get to know a little more about the story. Little did I realize that these are friends of 40 years who are reconnecting. And that is what is happening on the sidelines of this dialogue as well, which is making it as enriching. It takes a lot of courage to change, and even more courage to heal hearts. I was deeply moved when I heard the stories about the pain and healing, but how the Australian community, the Australian people like John Bond, Mike and Jean Brown, took on the responsibility to apologize to the Aboriginal people, which led to the next Prime Minister making a public apology, an unconditional public apology on behalf of the Parliament. When we heard of Wadia's efforts in Lebanon and in Iraq, and the challenges that she has been through as an Arab Christian in that area. And David's was an incredible strength of character, being one of the child soldiers of Sudan, and yet making healing a priority. And I'm just going to sign off with my favorite quote of Confucius, which came to mind when I was thinking of the last session we had. that when there be righteousness in the heart, there's beauty in character. When there's beauty in character, there's harmony at home. If there be harmony at home, there's order in the nation, and if there be order in the nation, there's peace in the world.